one of the things we wanted to do was let you in on a couple little things we're doing at AFPI that you may not be aware of, but that are very interesting and near and dear to my heart because I'm in comms and press. And that is, when you watch the left have control of every single lever of power and influence in this country, like the media, like colleges, universities, big tech, Hollywood, of course, it's tough to row against that tide. And so we wanted to kind of get into the space where so many are right now, and that's the podcast universe. And it's interesting because we've had some great guests so far on the podcast. It's called The Tank. And the reason we called it The Tank is because, as you know, the America First Policy Institute is a think tank. And so we thought it was fairly clever. We patted ourselves on the back.
Very clever.
Very clever. Think tank, The Tank. Very excited about it. And so we brought a lot of people up to the studio in Washington, D.C. to have conversations about what's going on in the country and do some deep dives into some of the policy, the good policy versus the bad policy, and also talk to people who've had some incredible experiences. We had Nicole Parker on from the FBI to talk about some of the rot that exists inside that agency. Fascinating stories she told about what she saw and people starting to move against and do things just for advancement. We've had Mark Robinson, Lieutenant Governor of the great state of North Carolina, who is a wonderful man, a Christian champion, someone pushing to expose the rampant problems with fatherlessness in the homes, much like Jack was talking about before. So it's a really good chance for us to get and reach a new and different audience. And quite frankly, it's pretty fun. So with that, I think it's important for Chad to now tell the group where we're headed next.
Coming to you from our nation's capital, this is The Tank, your voice in Washington, D.C. and around the country. Broadcasting from the America First Policy Institute offices in D.C., this is the premier think tank podcast where we discuss the challenges facing our nation, talk policy, and advance America First solutions. Welcome to The Tank.
Yeah, so we want to talk a little bit about our institutions. And so whether we're talking about our military institutions, education, healthcare, and the like, I think it's critically important that we not only address the current state of affairs, but also we're going to have a couple of folks come up and talk about where we should be going with each of these. I think what we've seen over time is that the left has co-opted many of these institutions,
right?
Obviously for their benefit, woke policies and the like. And I think it's critically important as we take these institutions back, to take them back, because as we do that, we bring liberty back to Americans. So let me introduce our first speaker, Doug Collins, who's been with us for the last couple of days. Really doesn't need another introduction, but I will say that he is not only a U.S. congressman, but also a state legislator who has been around this school choice debate for some time. So we're going to have him talk, as well as married. His wife is a 31-year teacher also. So we're going to have him talk a little bit about the importance of our education system and where we're going with that debate. So let me turn it over to Doug and have him take it away.
Outstanding. One of the things about education is it's the very foundational essence of everything we need. If you're looking for a silver bullet in this world today, the silver bullet is education. The silver bullet is actually getting out of your sphere of circle, getting out of your realm of importance, so to speak, of your own little world, and finding out that there's other little worlds out there. And it's amazing what can happen when you broaden your mind and you broaden your thought. It's not that you give up who you are, but you actually begin to understand others. When we understand that, then we begin to grow. And the conservative movement is about people. But when it comes to education, I have an interesting point for both of you. By the way, your tank talk is pretty interesting. I have a podcast called the Doug Collins Podcast. I'm more original than you are.
Well, it's another inventive name.
I tell you,
Doug
creativity,
Collins podcast, yes.
Pastor, lawyer, politician, creativity, not so much, or math. But other than that, we're good. But one of the things is in education, we have a problem in our country. My name may be Doug Collins, and my wife maybe have taught for 31 years, but I was fortunate enough when I was little, I was actually really a number. Some of you may not know you're a number, or your grandkids are a number, your kids are a number. My number was 30506. That's my zip code. And my zip code determined where I went to school. And fortunately enough, I had teachers who cared about me enough to know that education was the very thing that could take a state trooper's kid from North Georgia and actually raise me up to where I was reading books at home. That was my dad worked all the time. In fact, I did not know that people celebrated the 4th of July and other days because until one day I watched the TV and they were all going on picnics and my dad was going to work. But I could take books and I could take radio. But yeah, I had teachers in 30506 at Riverbend Elementary and then at North Hall High School who said, Doug, you can become more. But you know why? Because they were there about teaching and not about indoctrination. And that's where we're at today.
Doug, what's missing then in today's classroom?
Well,
yeah,
what we're missing is teachers. I watched a young lady who I married 35 years ago. I watched her teach for 31 years. I watched her come home at night, and I watched her fill up paperwork after paperwork after. As the later she taught, the more paperwork and other things she had to fill out on who's doing this and what's going here, instead of having to spend the time in the classroom. One day she literally came home and told me, and now she's out, so I can talk about it. I promised for years I wouldn't talk about it until she's out. She's out. She retired a couple of years ago. She would literally come home. And there was one day she told me, what did you do today? She said, well, we had this special presentation about health and service, and we had this presentation. I said, when did you actually teach? She said, well, we really didn't. That's the problem we've got now. But fortunately for many of you in this room, you had people like Miss Cabe in my fourth grade class. She had the audacity to sit me down the very first day of fourth grade, and she said, your handwriting stinks. Here's a handwriting book. It's time we have teachers again who are empowered to teach children and not empowered by the state to say, we want you to teach what we want them to know. We want them to know how to read, write, and actually grow up with a thinking heart. That's where we got to be.
That's critically important. Thank you, Doug. I think as we look at the education system overall, and last question for you, you touched on it here a little bit. Again, we're going to keep it moving, so yeah, it's good. I think what a lot of parents are really concerned about is sending their son, their daughter to school in this indoctrination that we're seeing here. And so, obviously, you've been in the United States Congress. What are some things that either, maybe you've actually been in both, state and federal. So what are some solutions that legislators and policymakers can do on this front?
I think actually begin to listen to groups like AFPI, Moms for Liberty, others out there who are finally, after COVID, there was not really any good thing ever came out of COVID except one thing. Parents, again, had to be parents because all of a sudden their kids were back at home and their lessons were coming to them over the internet. They were looking at a computer and they were saying, what is my kid being taught? And I think one of the best things that we can listen to is let's go back. The world of education is about expanding minds, critical thinking. I am so tired of, from high school to especially our higher education, believing that it's conformity that makes the person, and instead it is the diversity of critical thinking, looking and acting. Science is about a hypothesis and then proving it right or wrong. Science is not about am I a male or a female, and how do I get along in class, and should I make sure that the bully doesn't get me? Well, the bully is, you know what happened? I hate to say this, but sometimes in life, bullies come. And you know what happens? When you stand up to the bully typically runs. But when we're telling our kids, oh, back down, everybody has their opinion, then we're not teaching anymore. We're actually dumbing down society, and that's where it comes. But I'll tell you this, until we get over the fact that 30506 and whatever number you want to place in is the determinant of our education system, instead of freeing our teachers to teach, freeing our system to go at it, until we understand that we are not going to see differences, until we unleash our education back to the thing it's supposed to do, then we're in trouble. It's time to stand up and get involved in your local school board. Run for school board. Do the things that matter, because our kids can't be wasted.
Thank you so much, Doug. Appreciate it. Round of applause for Doug. That was great. And I always love being on TV with you, because after we get off the camera, you call me on the phone and we talk for another 10, 15 minutes.
Hogan, what'd you do?
That's usually right, too. All right, the next person we want to bring up here to have a quick one of our tank talks is Heidi Overton. We call her Doctor because she is a doctor and a doctor. And I don't even know, you're a surgeon, for heaven's sakes, but you're also a doctor of something else. There's too many titles.
This is all confusing for Hogan.
It's very confusing, because I'm just a press person. I don't do doctors. I don't cut people up. You have had an outstanding career in surgery, actually, and then you left that for public policy. So explain kind of the catalyst for that, what you saw, and why you made the move.
Yeah, there's a crisis of public trust in medicine and in public health, and that was really the catalyst for my decision. I found myself a White House fellow in March of 2020 when COVID hit, and all of a sudden the things that I was taught that should work in our system did not work. We didn't have the data we needed. We were asking hospitals to send us files to the White House because the data systems didn't work. We didn't have our public health agencies prepared to respond. That was their entire mission, was to respond to a virus that would spread across the world, and they couldn't do that well. our medical associations began to put ideology over medicine and evidence-based science. The science was vilified, and soon doctors were under siege from credentialing boards and their medical boards. We found them losing their licenses. And so everything that I thought would work didn't. And when it came time to decide if I would go back to the operating room or if I would stay at America First with Brooke and fight for the vision of what we had started in the White House, it was an easy decision because there was so much urgency. I didn't know if I went back to surgery for 5 years, I didn't know what I could return to. And so I felt like I had to stay in the fight and be part of the solution.
Well, AFPI is better for having you with us, so thank you for that. Heidi, something that you and I talked about probably a couple months ago and again today, when you were talking about how we get more conservatives into the medical field. But one thing that you brought up, which I thought was interesting, I think others will too, is you talked about how the left has not only co-opted the field, and they've done that because of the research papers, the peer review process. And so when conservatives come in and they have a different viewpoint, right, COVID-19 or whatever it might be, there's nothing for them to point to and say, no, this is actually evidence-based. Mm-hmm. And of course, all of that is years in the making. I mean, they've been doing this now for decades. So how do we change the dynamics there?
Yeah, and this is something I'm so grateful to people like Tim Dunn and others who are willing to ask, what is the 20-year vision for how you solve this problem? And we need alternate systems. We have for too long said that, conservatives are going to stay in the current system and just continue to fight and hope our ideas are heard. But in the meantime, the left starts journals called the Journal of Adolescent Transgender Medicine. And what do you think they publish in that every month, week after week, month after month? Articles that support all of their positions. And so when you go to criticize, and you might have one study that was funded that says, no, that's wrong, they bring you 50. And so you're up against this mountain of evidence. And one thing, that we have seen now happening in the current trend is Europe is actually doing better. Europe is being accurate with the data regarding transgender medicine in kids and chemical abortions. And they're starting to write into the Wall Street Journal and saying, America, you have this wrong. You need to be accurate with what you're talking about. So we need publications in academic journals that are conservative-based. We need research funding that is willing to say, no, let's fund these type of studies. That's not happening at the NIH. The FDA isn't prioritizing those kind of decisions. The CDC certainly is not. So all of those agencies have to be reformed in how they fund and prioritize. Board certification, we need alternate forms so that doctors who speak out are not afraid that they're going to lose their medical license or their livelihood. That is the greatest threat to doctors that I've seen. We had one of the frontline doctors with us on Wednesday night, and so many of them have had their medical licenses under fire. And we should have an alternate system of credentialing and licensing.
What drives people to kind of, I don't want to say the word fake science, but make things up? Is it just grants and money they receive? Is it their concern of being ostracized for not taking the right position on a social issue? Why would they ignore their own field just to try and push some type of political agenda?
I think there's a coordinated strategy from the top to say this is where we want society to go over the next 20 years. An equity agenda is part of every grant that you have to apply for now, every research publication. And so anyone who wants funding to work on their career, I was working on pancreatic cancer surgery. I would have to write today a grant that would have equity reasons for my pancreatic cancer research. So it's a very coordinated, strategic effort to put all of those into every aspect of medicine. And we need our own strategies that infiltrate just as much and have a long-range vision.
Well, let me say thank you. Thank you for what you do for AFPI and for the country, and we're proud to have you on board.
Thank you, Heidi. Are you Paula?
Well, let me bring to the stage Pastor Paula White. I think she's back here. There we go. Obviously, the center of American values here at AFPI in the White House, Faith and Opportunity Initiative, as well as over 37 years ministering. And before we get to Paula, which we will, I just have to say, they bring me on stage because I put some some style to Hogan here. If you haven't figured it out, he's not very stylish. And so we always have to we keep pumping him up here a little bit. So I'm not going to let you talk.
And Pastor Paula,
turn it over to
you know,
Pastor
you
Paula.
have theme music. Did you hear Brooke singing a Pastor Paula song a second? You have theme music. We should record. That's right. Okay, good.
Yay, Brooke.
All right, we're going to turn it over to you. I think a good question, Paula, is obviously, our houses of worship, the whole institution here is we certainly saw during COVID, but even before that, again, constant theme here is co-opted by the other side. So given your background, just talk to us a little bit about that and how do we get it back on track here?
Well, we saw unprecedented in our time, and it sure felt like it, especially during COVID, religious liberty battles. And we still have that fight. It's a big fight in America. And this fight's not going away, but there is good news. We have some green blades of grass, and I like to always bring good news as well. We've got some victories, and those victories are happening because little did any of us ever think when I first started doing my listening sessions with faith leaders, and I'm like, Jenny, what are we doing? Like, why is James Sure in here all the time? Why do we have this? And we were getting people basically passed through and pushed on. They said, there's this young lady, her name's Amy Coney Barrett, and she might one day make a great Supreme Court judge if we can get her on the lower courts. Wow. So we were going through all the process, which for us over OPL and faith and everything started with the weigh-ins and just bringing people and put 10,000 faith leaders through. We know the story of that. We got 3 Supreme Court justices. So yeah, we go big. But this is where, I just want to give a little bit here, Chad, because this is where what happened, and I think our biggest win is Coach Kennedy. Coach Kennedy was
Absolutely.
Just this, hardworking Marine. He went to the 50-yard line privately for 7 years, knelt down and prayed. And then activists came against him. You can't do that. And they fired him, brought it into a lawsuit. So First Liberty took that all the way to the Supreme Court. And when it went to the Supreme Court, not only did we win, and I did bring my notes because I'm not an attorney like Brooke, so not only did we win, and we won to say that there were 2 reasons that he basically won that the government violated, well, let me get to this other. So we won that right? But not only did it do that, we won the Lemon. And that was Lemon versus Kurtzman. And you say, well, what is that? I'm better at just explaining it. Then I'll give the 2 things. The Lemon versus the Kurtzman had ruled the land for 50 years. So remember in Alabama, I kind of had remembered this. They said, you can't put those 10 commandments there. Or they'd say to a kid, you cannot wear that cross. Or you cannot wear that T-shirt. Those are battles taking away your First Amendment right and your Establishment Clause. So what happened with the Kennedy case is it basically made the Lemon Law dead. And we are right now, this is important because we are what we call low tide. We want these battles. I love that Brooke is a fighter. I love that she's not afraid to say, let's get in this battle. Yes, we're praying. Yes, we're getting good policy and legislation, but we've got to fight also. So if a child takes a Bible and puts it on his desk and he's not disruptive, and an activist comes or somebody complains and says, you can't have that Bible there, we say, yes, you can. And they're going to call AFPI right away. And we're going to work with all of our partnerships, and we're going to work together to win these cases so we can establish Lemon Law is really dead. Amen? And there's a lot of others. I'm going to give one little thing, a few things, because there are a couple things on there that I thought were important. So we went some others, golf. You guys know about that, and then we'll be through. But I think right now we've got some cases at the Supreme Court. Be in prayer, understanding social media, whether the government may direct social media companies to censor speech based on speeches, religious or political. The debanking. Brooke, this is interesting. Whether the government may intimidate and threaten regulated entities or doing business with controversial speakers like NRA and others. Big government. We've got a few others that are being taken on with religious counselors and all, and I'll say this and why faith is important. I just got a call about an hour coming into here. Now, we're on the road all the time. We're doing Restore America tours as AFPI through Centers of American Values, working with National Faith Advisory Board. And we hear these stories of like people having their bank accounts closed or stuff. 1 hour prior to walking in here, I just got a letter from our bank, Wells Fargo, that shut us down. 1 hour with absolutely no reason and shut everything down. So I'm like, okay. I mean, have we ever even had a bounce check? No. And it's like, these are the real fights we're in. I'm standing on the stage, just got that. I'm cooling down right now. I wish my first word was, praise the Lord, but it wasn't. Yeah. So these are very real battles for all of us that we're facing. They want to take our voice, take our platforms, and we have got to stand in this gap.
Absolutely. And you're doing such important work, Pastor Paula, and this is why I love your message here. And that's because When we went out trying to get pastors involved with election integrity and things like that, a lot of the pastors came to us and said they were convicted. They said, we knew that God ordained the family, God ordained the church, but he also ordained the state. And we felt like 2/3 pastors. We weren't doing the full measure that he wanted, depending on what you're called to do at the time. But they said, we feel like we're called to get involved. You're obviously involved with things. You're up here talking about judicial cases, for heaven's sake. So why should all of the faith leaders be some of the ones leading these things in their communities?
Well, first off, I know this is going to sound really harsh, and I think it might be. I think it is sin not to be involved, because sin just means missing the mark. I think we're missing the mark and giving over not only America, but giving of our freedoms, giving of our faith, giving of our rights to people who do not hold our Judeo-value Christians. And this is so vitally important. It affects everything. We've seen that. Education, school. I mean, we know the whole list. You've been in all the policy things. But here's the reality. Why do politics matter? Politics is simply to organize and influence. When I'm an etymology girl, I'm like, if that's what it means, that's what I've been doing my whole life. You're a mama. You organize and influence every single day. So that's what we do. And then politics matters because policy matters. And policy matters because we all do this because people matter. And I've given my whole life since I got saved to serve God by serving people. And whether that was giving them a turkey when their belly was hungry, whether that was sending a child to school, whether that was 12 foster children we've had. My whole life has been about serving, that people could just see the light of God. If we pull back, can't you see the others taking not just our platforms, they're a minority. They're not us. We're on the grounds. The AOCs and that's just a little bit. You know how they're getting in the corporations and doing what they're doing with the banks? 2 organizations, 50,000 signatures. Putting pressures, getting on the boards, doing it. If we don't step up, and you look back, you go, well, how did China become an underground church? We don't have enough time. How did this happen? When good people failed to do what God called them to do. God bless you guys.
Absolutely. Well, thank you.
Wow.
Well, we could listen to her for hours, so we really appreciate your time here. Let me bring our last speaker, second to last speaker to the stage, Secretary Robert Wilkie. Let's get him up here. He's coming.
One of the best storytellers I know.
Yes. Well, thank you. Hey, Brooke, the Catholic has to follow the preacher, you know.
Obviously, our former secretary of the Veterans Administration, he also served in the Pentagon under President Trump, the number 3 position there. He's got a story for everything, and they're so fascinating. I call him the resident historian at AFPI. We're going to have him talk a little bit about our military institution right now. And so we were talking earlier, I think at this point, the defense budget's the smallest that we've seen since 1947, when we had about 11 million individuals and soldiers demobilized. So that's a crisis, but does it go deeper than that? And love to get your thoughts.
Yeah, money can be found. There is a deeper, and Pastor White talked about it, there's a deeper spiritual and moral crisis here. 41 million Americans have served since the first shots were fired at Lexington. Over 1 million have died, 600,000 in that pestilential catastrophe in the middle of the 19th century. But throughout our history, our folks, our soldiers, have always been the good guys. They knew it in their hearts, but they were told that by their leaders. A platoon of 82nd Airborne paratroopers has done more for world peace than all the UN agencies, all of the self-serving celebrity telethons combined will ever do. But now we see an administration that divides our soldiers just as they would divide some jobs program right out of the Great Society along ethnic, sexual, and racial lines. We have a chairman of the Joint Chiefs, the new one, who says he wants to reduce the number of Caucasian pilots in the Air Force to 43%. Now, as an Air Force colonel, I really don't care what the pilots look like, as long as they can fly those planes. Yeah. But we are destroying the military ethos. It's like professional sports. If you perform, you're accepted. And we are not doing service to our young people. When they come in, they have to spend 15 hours learning how to use pronouns. They spend another 20 hours learning about climate change. And in the meantime, the world continues to explode and America becomes in greater danger.
Always scary. You're always usually uplifting. That's very scary. But it's real, and it's what we're facing, which is why what we're doing is so important, what you've been working on as well, Mr. Secretary. But so in the Middle East, we've got some problems going on right now, obviously. What we've seen is horrific. But in the previous administration, it seemed as though we were more feared, loved, and respected than we were before. And we were able to get peace deals that no one thought possible, in large measure because we rallied the region around a common enemy in Iran. Now we have the second Obama administration, in essence, kind of coddling up, cozying up to Iran. Are they scared of us at all? I mean, there are all kinds of movements we're trying to do over there, and it seems like it doesn't bother them one bit.
Earlier today, I believe it was Larry Kudlow said that the bad guys watch what we're doing at home. In March of 2021, the current Secretary of State was in Alaska, and he was harangued by his counterpart from China, who simply read back to him Joe Biden's speeches about how irredeemably racist and evil the United States story was. Now, all the Secretary of State could do was say, we have to be better. Now, had that been Donald Trump or Richard Nixon, the response would have been the United States of America that has liberated more towns, more villages, more countries, more people than any country in the history of the earth is not going to be lectured to by a country that has murdered 100 million of its own people since 1949. There are 2 carrier task forces in the Middle East. There is absolutely no doubt in my mind that the mullahs, the theocratic fanatics, believe that Joe Biden would know how to use them. They look at Afghanistan, they look at his Secretary of State and his Secretary of Defense. 50 years ago, the Israelis were attacked. They mounted a counter offensive that was textbook, and our friend, the late Ariel Sharon, was 30 kilometers from Cairo. He could see it. And the Soviet Union uncovered its paratroop divisions, its missile fields. Within 30 minutes of Richard Nixon knowing that, the entire Sixth Fleet sailed. B-52 bombers, both British and American, were moved to Diego Garcia, pointed at the Soviet Union. Brezhnev went back into his hole. Donald Trump did the same thing in Syria. The Russians got too close. He told Putin to back off. 300 of their little green men evaporated in a red dust. The Iranians got too close. Donald Trump eliminated the mastermind of the greatest terror organization and network on the planet, Soleimani. They feared him because he knew the latent power of the United States. And adopting the greatest of political theorists in the White House, Teddy Roosevelt, when it came to foreign policy, don't say much, but make sure that everyone knows you've got the big stick.
Yeah, well, thank you, Secretary Wilkie. Appreciate your thoughts. It's exactly why we have you at AFPI. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You know,
That's good.
I saw someone recently on television who said, they were over in Israel, and they said, it turns out it matters to more than just America who the President of the United States is. Leadership matters. So speaking of leadership, I'm going to bring to the stage Brooke, and I remember right before we got this whole time started, she said, do I want to do that? Is it too much, Brooke? And I said, oh, no, not for me. It's not too much, Brooke. I said, it's not for the crowd. It's definitely not too much, Brooke, for America.
No, Hogan. Yeah.
And we often talk about getting brooked.
Yeah, no. I'm so sorry, everyone. Well, first of all, thank you for sticking with us. We're at the kind of the last piece of the program. And I think that even though not the full room that we had, that those of you who have stayed with us through these important discussions will be glad that you did. Not only because what you just heard from some of the most incredible leaders of our movement, I think is really telling in how we're going to work to reclaim all of our institutions over the coming year and years. But the final tank talk, I wanted to get up on stage and give you a little bit of an introduction. And the reason is this. Our chairman of our China initiative is an incredible man by the name of Steve Yates, who many of you know. He is really taken the work on our China effort to a new level. Interestingly, a little bit of insider baseball on AFPI. As you all know, we're organized into about 22 different policy centers based on the Trump second-term agenda. That did not get to happen contiguously. But the China Initiative is not a policy center. It is an initiative because we realized that across every policy lane and policy center, the threat of communist China is so pernicious that we can't just have one center that just talks about that the China Initiative water skis and works alongside every single center, education, border security, et cetera. So Steve came on board a little over a year ago to lead that. But that is not what he's going to talk about. Just a few weeks ago, Steve lost his daughter to fentanyl. And people deal with grief in many ways. There is no doubt that the fentanyl crisis that our country is facing is real. I am guessing that everyone in this room at least knows of someone that has lost a child or a friend, or at least knows someone that has. It is affecting every family in this country. But when it hits home to one of our family members, it becomes much more personal. In the last White House, we worked on this issue. We actually made a lot of progress under Kellyanne Conway, Ivanka Trump, and President Trump. I actually did not work on it, but a lot of our great team members did. A lot of that progress has gone backwards since President Biden took office. But Steve asked, and I, of course, said yes, if he could just spend 7 or 8 minutes, first of all, remembering his beautiful Christina in a way that elevates what she meant to he and his family, but also the importance of this fight. So without further ado, please help me welcome the incredible Steve Yates, chairman of our China Policy Initiative. You got it. You got it.
Well, thank you very much. I deeply wish it was for different reasons I was speaking today, and I pray for your support to keep me focused. I would usually just speak from the heart. In a past life, was one of those junkies in politics that would just get up and rally a crowd and rally a party and try to get people to vote. Today, I want to hit your head and your heart and hopefully get your feet into action with me in joining a cause that I think is vital to saving the American family. I see what happened to me as not an isolated event, but I want to start with the joy. My Christina came by the miracle of adoption. She came out of terrible circumstances. Her mother was in a correctional facility in Maryland. She had fetal alcohol and fetal cocaine poisoning. She came out of a very, very distressed family, and one of the best pediatric research physicians known in this country at the time advised me, don't adopt this child. Let another family take this child in. She's going to have a series of difficulties that are known for these kinds of exposures. Obviously, I couldn't take that advice, but if you look at Christina's face, you will see the bolt of lightning that came into my world. Never did she really rest. I think her body turned off for times. When she was an infant, at very young age, I didn't know what people were talking about with their kids staying up at night because Christina would go just bonkers from about 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Wouldn't stop. She would run on the knuckles of her feet around, running into things just nonstop, did everything fast. Then when 8 o'clock came, she'd go to the steps and she'd hold her arms up and say, Daddy, carry Wheatie Pie. And I'd take her up to bed and we'd do a hug, kiss, and a pat, and she'd be out for 8 hours every night. And I thought, well, this is a miracle. I get to sleep. Well, later in life, she found a way to keep her dad up. Turned out she had some dark passengers. Other people know these things. They come by way of these exposures. They can be mental health disability, a high propensity for addiction. And we have very weak institutions and support in our society for helping parents and families be able to recognize and deal with these things. They come at great expense, and a lot of times you don't succeed. But it's worth the fight. I got to celebrate 100 years of life and 25 years with Christina. But the demons were strong. We fought to bring her back to sobriety, and we did for a time. But what I want to now pivot to is not the discussion about Christina, but what our nation is fighting. We have a supply and a demand problem. There's a demand being created for the poison that killed Christina. It's done by identity confusion anxiety, depression accentuated by addictive media platforms, woke mind virus. All these things cause people to question their self-worth and the people that they could rely upon. And that depression creates a demand for a lot of mood-altering substances that get prescribed, and those can become addictive. And then when kids get to be a certain age, they step away from the legitimate pharmacy and they start taking things off market. And they don't know that when they do that, they have literally rolled the dice into the hands of entities that I believe intentionally are attacking the American family. What do I mean? Well, my daughter did not go out and say, I'd like to go get high on fentanyl. She took something else. And it turned out it was laced with fentanyl. And we are dramatically undercounting the number of casualties in these cases. The death certificate that I received said it was complications due to a multiple toxin. But the EMTs, the police, the ICU specialists, they made very clear it was fentanyl. There's something very different about this drug. It makes the other ones that the kids are taking more addictive, and the consequences are more lethal. It makes it so that we have less time to respond. And so I want to pivot for a minute. I'm only able to hit the wave tops because we have a limited period of time. But it's so important to understand. AFPI is a unique organization because we have multiple lanes of expertise of people with real knowledge and what to do and how to do it. And it's going to take that to be able to save the American family from this. Some of it's going to be medical and physical. We have about 3 minutes or less if you're going to resuscitate someone and have them be a functional human being after oxygen has stopped going to their brain. My Christina waited 15 minutes. It led to 12 long days before she went to Heavenly Father. This is a battle for time. One of the few things that we can do is to make Narcan available in as many places as possible. That's not cheap, but it needs to be accessible within a few minutes. We need to make sure people know how to use it, when to use it, recognize the symptoms. Christina thought she was having an asthma attack, asked for a rescue inhaler, then collapsed. It wasn't asthma. Fentanyl shuts down the lungs, which then kills the brain. So we have to educate people. We have to make some of these things available. We're going to have to deal with the supply side of it. There are evil networks that know what they're doing. The Chinese are producing the precursors for these chemicals. They're working with the cartels over an open border. And all of this is, as Don Rumsfeld used to call, a known known. This, at this point, is really a question of will and priority. We're going to have to mobilize to make our government take this attack on the American family seriously. I see this not as the loss of my lovely daughter. That's a tremendous loss for me. But mine is one of hundreds of thousands of families that are suffering emotionally, financially, but we're also losing a generation that should be making America more productive, a generation that should be recruits to the greatest fighting force known to mankind to save the world, to preserve freedom. This is more than just a drug addict going out to get a fix. This is, I believe, war declared on the American family. And I feel like this is a 9/11 for the American family in that the war was declared on us, and our only choice is whether and how we're going to respond. You don't get peace. We have to fight. And so to me, I take great solace in the family and friends at AFPI. I'm deeply, deeply grateful for the understanding and support and the prayers that have come. And ultimately, it is that is my final confession in this, as I talk about the journey that I took with my Christina. Only God can overcome addiction, and only God can save the American family, and only God can save this American experiment, and only AFPI is getting everyone organized across all lanes of our policy work, from the mechanics of how to govern to outreach through churches and athletes and actually reaching people who can make a difference to hopefully save the next Christina so that her dad can fight for her to come back to normal without a super drug like fentanyl cutting it off too short. But thank you very much for listening and upholding, but please join this crusade.
what do you say? We did a prep call on this, and we were all crying on the prep call. I just hugged him hard and said, you made it through. But I promised him, and my commitment was that we will never give up on this issue as long as I'm running AFPI or involved in public policy. That board members like Trish Duggan, who did so much for this family in this local area, Babu Nonway and others that are here, our commitment is that we will fight every second in Christina's name from now on until we're done and we're won. So God bless you for being willing to stand up in front of a couple hundred people and tell your story that's so fresh when your heart is so broken. But we will make her life count, and we will win. So God bless you, Steve Yates.
Text the word TANK to 70107. That's TANK to 70107 to get exclusive content from the Tank podcast and to learn more about the America First Policy Institute.